I'm Billy C. for Twinstiq.com, and this is LA Cops. Developed by Modern Dream and published by Team 17, there's no denying that LA Cops is very similar to Hotline Miami. Now that's not a dig on LA Cops by any means, as without imitation and iteration, we wouldn't have the first-person shooter or real-time strategy or any other gaming genre for that matter. So, imitation isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the hope is that when you do something similar, you also do something to distinguish yourself, while improving upon what came before it. Does LA Cops do that? In some respects, yes. In others, it leaves a little bit to be desired. The style of LA Cops is just fantastic, from the cel-shaded rooms and characters to the ridiculous 70s cop show setting. Even the music is great, though it only lasts a little while as there's a very limited selection of tracks. I really have very little to complain about in the presentation department. The first is that the camera does not zoom enough to see the entire room that you're in, which means that you'll often be forced to walk out into the middle of a room away from any and all cover before seeing that the far end is littered with Uzi-wielding enemies. The second problem is the objectives window. It's almost entirely useless, most missions just being about killing enemies and maybe breaking a few tables, but the window takes up such a large portion of the top right of the screen that it can be difficult to maneuver around it. The gameplay of LA Cops is also a mixed bag. It's an isometric twin-stick shooter with an element of tactics thrown in to differentiate it from Hotline Miami. When I first started playing the game, having not played Hotline Miami before this, I didn't have a good time. The game felt tactical with two characters you could control, taking either direct control or using the Move To command to position your AI partner. Bullets shot into walls drew the attention of enemies and it could quickly overwhelm you, and so it seemed like it was necessary to try and stealth through most sections and handcuff as many enemies as possible, keeping the noise down until all hell finally does break loose. Sadly, that's just not what LA Cops is. That's perhaps what it aspires to be, but if so, it falls short. In fact, the only real strategy that seemed to work was to go in guns blazing and lure enemies through the doors. Sadly, the AI-controlled partner is near useless. Sometimes he kills 4 or 5 enemies in a few seconds, and other times he'll just stand there and not fire a single shot as enemies run right through the doorway that he's guarding, which leads to him being murdered, and shortly after you being murdered. In LA Cops, you do have 2 police officers and a single resurrection per level in the form of a randomly placed health pack. You must find, grab, and return said health pack to your dead partner's body in order to resurrect them. In addition, it's almost always a better idea to leave your AI partner way back out of harm's way, as kind of a second life or backup situation. It doesn't help anything when the game's mechanics seem like they're fighting you either. In a fast-paced, Twitch-style shooter like this, where bullets are at a premium for the nicer guns, it should be obvious what it takes to kill an enemy so that you can engage the next enemy. I should be able to walk into a room, pop 2 shots into one enemy, and immediately start turning toward the next as I know that that first enemy will be dead. In LA Cops, I could sometimes kill an enemy with 1 shot, and other times it would take 2 or 3. There was never any indication of an enemy's toughness, and so you might turn a corner and put a shotgun shell point blank into an enemy's chest, only to have them return fire and kill you. If you're locked onto an enemy and you have a clear line of sight, you will always hit that enemy when you fire. It's so powerful that I could kill a swarm of 5 or 6 enemies that were running at me through a door just by pressing alternating lock on and fire buttons, but the problem is that the game does not lock on to the enemy that's closest to your cursor. The game instead locks on to the enemy that's closest to you. What this means is that you may have several enemies rushing through an open door that you're targeting, but when you hit lock on, your character immediately locks onto an enemy in another room behind you that you can't actually shoot. Doors are another source of frustration in LA Cops. Most doors are closed when you first come to them, and you can swing them open either way by just moving into them. Most of the time. Sometimes you can try to nudge a door open to sneak into a room, and it will explode for no discernible reason, leaving you exposed. Additionally, a door can be used to stun enemies. Another way that LA Cops stands out is its stable of playable characters. You can pick from an assortment of cops, each of which can be leveled up individually. This makes each cop unique as you experiment, but you quickly realize that unless you want to repeat the same levels over and over for XP, you aren't going to play any other cops besides the 2 that you started with. So, LA Cops has many problems that keep it from being a classic like the game it takes inspiration from. But it does enough to stand apart that it's a fun game in its own right. With 9 levels and a selection of bonus levels, multiple officers to play through that really only affect aesthetics, and an attempt at tactical gameplay that mostly just becomes an interesting way to handle extra lives, LA Cops is kind of a hard sell. I really want this game to be amazing because it has so much potential, but unfortunately it falls a little short. Does that make LA Cops a bad game? Not at all. It's a fun little game that kept me entertained for a while, but it didn't make any serious headway into my daily gaming schedule. LA Cops gets a 2.5 out of 5, but with the caveat that most of its problems could theoretically be patched, and the developers have stated that they're working on the partner AI, so that could change in the future. My recommendation? Pick it up if you find it on a sale, but unless you're a huge fan of this fledgling genre, don't pick it up when there are more coherent offerings out there.